Hey, everybody, and welcome to today's Analytics as Code deep dive. I am VP of Product Strategy here at GoodData, Ryan Dolley, and I am thrilled to be joined today by my friend, Donald Farmer. Donald, why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, thank you very much, Ryan. Yes, delighted to be recording with you again. I'm Donald. I've been in the business intelligence data analytics space for a very long time. Worked in all sorts of fields here. I'm an independent advisor to software companies and investors and enterprises all around the world on data and analytics strategy.
Cool. Well, it's great to have you here today, Donald, to talk about Analytics as Code. I think the first question is a simple one, and that is just what is analytics as code? Where does this idea come from? There are other as code concepts that you hear about. Infrastructure as code, for example, is a popular one. What is analytics as code?
Well, it's a simple question, and I'll try and give it a simple answer. I think the most important thing about analytics as code is that if you think of the way in which we build analytics normally, if you like, traditionally, we have measures, we have dimensions, we have all sorts of hierarchies and things that we create as ways of navigating our analysis. And what are these? When you save them, when you create them in your user experience, what are you creating? And analytics as code is a way of saying, well, what you're actually creating is the underlying code that generates these objects. And that's a little bit different because most of the time when we talk to people about their business intelligence, in a sense, they know that they're creating a dashboard, but they don't know what the components of that dashboard, for example, are. And with analytics of code, you're actually very aware that you're creating components that can then be reused, reconfigured in different ways. So in some ways, it's a way of exposing the structure of analytics to the user in such a way that it can be reused, it can be inherited, it can be modified, it can be versioned and changed over time. All the things that developers have been doing for many years with code. So analytics as code is a way of saving the artifacts and the objects of business intelligence in this highly reusable way. And I think that sometimes the as code word is a little scary to people, and it shouldn't be because that's really what it's just really what I'm describing. It's a way of um, objectifying these artifacts of business intelligence in such a way that they can be reused. It's not about everybody learning, Python or learning to write scripts. It's more about the infrastructure behind that enables reuse and collaboration, which is a really important part of business intelligence.
Yeah, and I think often neglected over the years. As someone who's spent many years as a BI practitioner, I can't tell you how many times I was forced to rework stuff I had already done because there was no way to save off the underlying artifacts and recombine them into something new. So that begs the question, okay, so that's what it is. Why is it necessary? Why now do you think is the time for analytics as code to become a thing?
Right. Well, it's necessary in order to address those problems that you just mentioned. I mean, I've worked in this business intelligence for a long time. I was like everybody else. I was very excited by the self-service business intelligence kind of developments in the early 2000s, and I was fair to say I think I was a large part of developing those products and those strategies, and they didn't work. Well, they worked to a certain extent. I don't want
Right.
to downplay that. They did, but our aim was, we often talked about like the democratizing of business intelligence. And,
Yeah.
and that really didn't work because what actually happened was, yes, we managed to enable business users, but primarily power users to build their own business intelligence. But the lack of collaboration and the lack of reuse was a real problem.
Mm.
And collaboration is absolutely critical in business intelligence because you're trying to understand the the dynamics of a business, and you're trying to then track and measure those things. And as we've moved from business intelligence much more towards analytics, which is predictive and prescriptive analytics, and now, of course, we're now moving even further towards artificial intelligence and increased automation, the need for collaboration just becomes greater and greater. But we don't have the infrastructure. That those tools are primarily not collaborative. You can sometimes collaborate in terms of commenting, but you can't collaborate in
Yeah.
the creation. But the world has really moved on to a much more complex place. We need collaborative creativity, And analytics as code is a way of enabling that. So its time really has come. It's actually critical that we have a collaborative development environment now for analytics.
I'm curious, why do you think analytics and business intelligence have lagged behind? Like if you look at many other disciplines in technology, they're just much earlier to both this as code philosophy, but the overall embrace of collaboration and many authors of a single object and that sort of thing. Like what has held us up in the data industry?
I think it has been the mindset of the power user, the specialist person who has the keys to the castle when
Yeah.
it comes to analytics and data. We're at a phase where there is a limited amount of data literacy in organizations, and therefore it's not much like the Middle Ages. There's a small number of elite, highly literate users who are creating, the business intelligence artifacts, and that is dramatically changing because now everybody has access to data, and everybody has the tools which enable them to make at least some sense of data. And of course, we're all much more data literate. And so, data analytics have been lagging behind because people didn't have that pressing need to be able to create their own environments and create their own objects. And now they do. And if you look at something like infrastructure as code, which is, I think, a very appropriate comparison, infrastructure as code really became critical when we moved to the cloud. At one point, it was, developing infrastructure, setting up servers, for example, involved bringing a physical server on site, configuring it, setting up all its policies and security and so on. And it was literally a physical operation. And I can remember servers arriving on trucks and being installed.
Yeah.
And now servers are virtual objects which exist in the cloud, and you may have thousands of them. And in order to manage servers in the cloud, you can't do that physically and get in and configure everything on each machine individually. And so what you do is you save the configurations as code, which can then be modified and scripted and run at enormous scale. And it turns out that with analytics, we now can do something similar. Rather than the individual specialist crafting the perfect dashboard on their desktop and then deploying it, we now have, of course, many more objects and many more people engaged with the creativity of analytics, and therefore it needs a different approach. And the time has come when we have to learn from strategies like infrastructure as code and bring that into the analytics world. So this is very much something which the time has come, and we're ready for this.
I think it does beg the question though, who is it for, right? So you mentioned and I think the comparison to the Middle Ages is very apt, right? Wherein we're kind of emerging from an era of analytics where it was this specialist who really understood the intricacies of the tool, and you would all have to go to that specialist in order to get your dashboards made. Um, so how does that change with analytics as code? Like, it doesn't mean everybody should learn to code. Are we talking about business people writing Python, or is it something different? What is it really?
I really hope it doesn't involve business people writing Python. No, no. I mean, the as code. I think I said at the beginning, it's not misleading. I mean, the code is behind this, but it's not that you are writing code. It is that code is the way in which the objects that you're creating are saved, are realized, are made into objects that can be reused. That's what the analytics as code piece is about. You can still create those objects through user interfaces, through user experiences, which are visual and interactive. Of course, you can write code if you want to, and some people will, and some people use code to tweak objects that other people have created, and they'll copy the code and then use an interface to modify it. So no, people do not learn, don't need to learn to be developers. It's not like everybody becomes coders, but it's a paradigm for the infrastructure, the architecture of this process that makes it reusable, and that's why the term is appropriate, and it shouldn't scare people off because it's really a way of enabling people to use a greater variety of approaches in developing business intelligence and analytics, and ultimately predictive analytics and even AI artifacts, rather than a restrictive approach.
Let me ask you too, you mentioned all the different types of analytics, and that last one, AI, obviously has been a very hot topic now for a couple of years with the advent of Gen AI and Gen AI coming into the analytics world. you know, both kind of on its own and through vendor features that we're seeing added to different pieces of software. But how do those two trends do you see interact? Like the as code, and does that have a bearing on the Gen AI piece? Do those two work together? How do you see that forming as time goes on?
It's actually going to be super interesting, and we're at an early stage of that particular development. So this will develop over time. But one of the interesting things about code is that code is language. Code is it's a very specialized language. It's a somewhat artificial language, but it's a language. And of course, the most exciting models that we see in AI these days are language models. And it turns out that AI is very good at generating code because it's very good at manipulating language. So you're definitely going to see the development of analytics models which are based on language, therefore based on code, that can be generated by AI, which means that rather than going to a development environment, an IDE, a visual environment, or rather than learning to code, you'll be able to ask a language model, ask a chatbot to help you build artifacts, and the chatbot will generate the code that is underlying that, and that is language, and it'll be extremely effective. Now, I see we're at an early stage of that. There's development that needs to be done, and we all know about some of the interesting things that happen with AI, but that is absolutely the direction in which things are going, and we should be pretty excited about that.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I see that too. Just, once you have this code-based analytics system in place, that it's just much more easy and obvious how the AI will interact with it, because that's exactly how it'll do it. The AI will be able to generate the code because it's language. You mentioned earlier this idea, the paradox of self-service, and I'm curious if you're someone who is trapped. Let's say you work at a company, you are one of these power user gurus. You know what? First of all, could you? Because I think it's just so fascinating, and it's something I've seen over the course of my career as well. Is just there's the promise of self-service, but it's so hard to realize. Do you think analytics as code will get us closer to that? And if you are that person who is the expert in the BI tool, how do you see that transition happening, like to a more code-based world? What skills do they need?
Well, I think the transition that we're going to see is, of course, this transition from the individual being the individual center of excellence to a more collaborative center of excellence. And so, one of the skills that they're going to need is a collaborative skill. How do they building something for reuse is rather different from building something that is going to be, single purpose. And a good example of this is let me give you a very specific example of creating, say, a geography dimension, that describes the geography of a business, the countries, the regions, the cities, the states, the offices that a company works in. And every time we build and analytics. We have a time dimension, we have a geography dimension. Geography is just one of these things that we have to do. And today we have to build it every single time. And the problem with that is that people have different views of geography. So finance thinks of geography in terms of tax jurisdictions, and marketing thinks of geography in terms of demographics and markets that it wants to reach. So those are different things, but they all ultimately have to align in some way. And if we can, take a master dimension and inherit from it, then that becomes really efficient and valuable, but it also enables greater trust, greater reusability within the organization. Now, today, the process of doing that requires the highly specialized user to build something every time. And in the future, they will still be probably building some of those master dimensions, but they'll have to have a view to how is this going to be reused, and who is going to be reusing it, and what are the requirements of people downstream. So they're going to have to develop a somewhat different mindset. Maybe that's a better way of putting it. They have to develop a different mindset rather than a different skill set. They have to think
Hmm.
about this as a collaborative process rather than a question of a sort of individual pursuit of a silo. We often talk in the industry about data silos, and we've put a lot of work into removing data silos where we can so that data can be shared. But actually, a lot of silos are silos of expertise and silos of people, which don't traverse our boundaries. People don't work across boundaries, and skills become siloed within particular organizations, and that's really what we need to change. So I think it's more of a change in mindset than a change of skill set.
That's fascinating. Yeah, uh that's really I think it's funny. We talk so much as an industry about technology, 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 and I think it's because the hype cycles in the industry are driven by technology vendors
Yeah,
in many ways. So it's natural that we would do that. But with AI and now with analytics as code, I'm increasingly seeing no, the technology is important, but it's that change in mindset that we're going to have to embrace as data practitioners going forward that will offer, you know, maybe in some respects our biggest challenge, but also offers the biggest rewards on the other side.
for sure. I mean, changing mindsets is actually more difficult than changing
Yeah.
skill sets in some ways.
Yeah, great. Well, I think that just about wraps up what we have time for today. Donald, if people want to follow you and catch up with your research and everything, where can they do that?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn, of course. That's where I share a lot of my thoughts, and I'm regularly posting on a blog, but
Mhm.
I post that on LinkedIn as well. So the easiest way to find me is through LinkedIn. I am on Twitter, X, whatever we call it now.
Yeah.
You can see me on there, Donald Treehive. I am called there, but I think LinkedIn is probably the safest place to find me.
Yeah, I can heartily recommend your Substack. It's fascinating. Every time it comes out in my inbox, I'm always happy to read it. The other place you can check out Donald's research, of course, is in our Analytics as Code white paper, which you can download at gooddata.com. So go check that out. It dives deep into a lot of the topics that we cover today: the paradox of self-service, the advantages of code, the reusability of code. So do check it out. And I want to thank you one more time for joining us here on the webinar today, Donald. It's always such a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you very much. It's been great fun.
Okay.